Everyone, apologies for the slightly late start this evening. Welcome to this meeting of the now renamed Housing, Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel. Before we get going, I'm just going to ask for introductions from those people who are present here this evening. My name's Matt White. I'm Councillor for Tottenham Central and I'm chair of this panel. I'm going to ask the members of the panel to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Hi, I'm Tammy. I'm the Labour Councillor for St Anne's.
St Anne's. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sorry, Mark Blake, Fortis Green, Labour.
Charles Adjason, South Tottenham, Labour.
Thank you very much. And if I could ask the officers who are present here today in the room, starting at the far end over there, please.
Good evening, I'm Anita Marsden. I'm the Head of Integrated Care for Adults and I'm here for the AIDS and Adaptation.
Hi, I'm Hannah Adler. I'm the Interim Head of Housing Strategy and Policy.
Hi, Denise Gandy, Assistant Director for Housing Demand.
Hi, Judith Page, Assistant Director for Housing Property Services.
And also we have one of the Cabinet members that this panel covers today.
Hi, I'm Councillor Dana Carlin. I'm Cabinet Member for Housing, Planning and Licensing.
I forgot about you, Philip. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Philip Slaughter and I am the Scrutiny Officer for this panel.
Great, thank you very much everyone. Welcome this evening. Okay, so first item on the agenda is the usual item about filming at meetings. That's just to remind everyone that this meeting is being filmed, it's being broadcast live and it will be made available for people to view the proceedings afterwards. So by entering the meeting, you are basically allowing yourself to be filmed. So it's just a reminder of that. Right, I think we'll leave it at that. I don't believe we've had any apologies for absence this evening.
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. And I also don't believe that we've got any urgent business.
That's correct, no urgent business.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, do any of the panel members have any declarations of interest relevant to the agenda this evening? I see no declarations of interest. So moving on, I don't believe we've got any deputations, etc. this evening. No. Okay. So next item is the minutes from our last meeting in September. Those are on pages 1 to 8 of the agenda pack. Do any panel members have any queries about the accuracy of those minutes? I did have one comment to make myself. If we could just refer to page, I think it's page 3. And I was just looking at paragraph N, which related to a conversation that I had with Councillor Gordon at the last meeting. And it mentions that in the minutes that that in response to my questions, the Cabinet member advised that she was pushing for as many houses at social rent as possible. My actual recommendation of that conversation was that she specifically said council rent. And I just wanted to be kind of clear about this, because I know that there are some of these categories are a little bit slippery when we're talking about the types of rents that we're charging. But I know that she was very, very clear about charging council rent. Now, I know Councillor Gordon's not here this evening. I don't know if Councillor Carlin is here. What I wanted to ask because I think we need to be very clear when we're talking about the terminology that we use when we say these things. And I suppose this isn't about the accuracy of the minutes so much as just a clarification from what was said at the previous meeting. When we're talking about council rent, are we talking about formula rents, or are we talking, when we're talking about pushing for the maximum council rent, are there other forms of rent that could fall under that fall under that category? And are we considering those? You know, if we are, what forms of the rent are they? And are we considering using any of them in any of our new build projects?
Hi, I'm happy to come back on that. On behalf of my fellow cabinet member, although I don't build homes, obviously rents are something that does come within my portfolio. There used to be only one form of council rent, and that was the formula rent. Now, if we can define council rent as a rent that only applies to secure council tenancies, so it's a council rent, doesn't apply to housing associations, doesn't apply to other forms of social housing. So when we talk about social rents, it's a larger envelope because it would apply to both council rents, and it would also apply to social rents that are offered by other social housing providers, but not councils. So assured tenancies, which are the kinds of tenancies that are provided by housing associations, for example. Council rents only apply to council properties. And it used to be that the only council rent that there was a formula rent, which is worked out in a formula from the government on new tenancies, but people pay different amounts because they're historic council rents from when they moved into the property as part of their tenancy agreements. The Mayor of London, as part of his building, I don't have the date because I don't have the paper in front of me, but the Mayor of London set up another form of council rent, which again only applies to council secure tenancies. That is a rent that is known as London Affordable Rent. It was set up for London, and it was part of the building scheme, so that in order to get a grant from the GLA, you have to build council homes for a council rent. And both the formula rent and London affordable rent are considered council rents. So when my colleague was talking about council rents, what she's also talking about is not just council homes, they're council homes on council tenancies. There are secure tenancies that come with everything that a secure tenancy comes with, and they are let on council rents. Otherwise, they're not a council home. We do have other properties that we don't let on council rents. We use them as temporary accommodation. We have the properties as further on in this paper. There's a paper about the properties that we buy and we let out for 7-year tenancies, etc. Those are not the same. Those are not council properties. They are not let out at council rents. They're not secure tenancies, although they're long tenancies. Now, a London affordable rent is higher than a formula rent. However, and they used to be very close together. So when it was originally set up by the Mayor of London, the rents were almost exactly the same. But the government then followed a policy of reducing council rents. So they made us reduce them by 1% a year, plus the London affordable rent increases by CPR plus 1% a year. So it has diverged. And there is a gap at the moment in the next year of about £30 to £35 per tenure. However, when we look at that against some of the other social rents that are being charged, it's considerably less. because some of the other social rents that are being charged are not even lower than the local housing allowance. Now, LHA rates are the maximum amount you can get for housing benefit, and our rents that we're talking about in terms of LAR rents, London affordable rents, are very much lower than housing benefit. So that's the difference, but they are both council rents. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And sorry if I could just continue on this. So apologies to the other panel members, but I just did want to, because obviously what your colleague Councillor Gordon was saying at the last meeting, was she was talking about the challenges that were facing the house building programme, and she did mention. I mean, I was asking, about how we cross-subsidise the house building programme and what different options were available. And she certainly said that there was a possibility of looking into the council charging other forms of rent than currently. Now, my understanding of the council house building programme since 2018, that it's been focused on, and as the council homes have all been to date been let on formula rent. Now, I understand the commitment is for council homes at council rent, and as you've very clearly set out, London affordable rent is considered another type of council rent. But is the council now, is this administration now, considering changing the policy so that some of the council homes will be let? Because it sounds a little bit from what you're saying that we may be considering changing the policy so that some of the homes will be let at London affordable rent then.
So in terms of our house building programme, the policy has been to use the council rent that is formula rent. And in terms of letting council homes for council rents, we haven't obviously changed, and that's a manifest commitment that has been since 2018. However, the financial situation that we're now in terms of the increased costs of materials, which are huge, the increased costs of building, which is huge, the increased interest rates, which have doubled from the Public Works Board, and the situation that we're in at the moment, what is important is that the housing revenue account, the government allows us to borrow to build homes against the housing revenue account. But we're only allowed to do that as long as the housing revenue account remains sustainable. And so in order to borrow the money, the interest rates have to, the interest rates have to be paid for by future rents. At the moment where we are, unfortunately, the interest rates will not be covered by formula rent. Now, so on some schemes, we are talking about building, it's not all the homes we're building, but we are talking about building some of our homes at London affordable council rent in order that these builds are viable. However, what we must always remember is that where we are demolishing homes, there has been a commitment that the rents that people, there won't be that level of divergence, obviously. We know that in terms of the consultations that we've done on Broadwood Farm and on High Road West, that there is already an agreement about what rents people will pay. So people are moving because their property is being demolished. They should not have to then pay a higher rent of, that level of gap. It's obviously not acceptable. So it will be only a proportion of the homes. Also, what's happening is that it is possible, that's not really clear exactly at the moment, but is being mooted, that for the GLA, that they could be, but we don't know because most boroughs have moved now to London affordable rent for their council rents on new builds, that they may remove London affordable rent as an option, in which case we wouldn't be able to use it. And if I can just clarify one thing as well, is that there were other options looked at. But one of the things that makes our house building program viable is that we get a grant from the GLA. And if we were to build, for example, shared ownership or even private rented, though we don't get the grant. So for it to be viable, this is the way for Haringey to continue to build council houses, to continue to get the grant per property that allows us to make these schemes viable.
Thank you very much for that. And if I just wind up on this just by asking, are you able to share with us, you say that you're considering including some London affordable rent on some schemes. Are you able to share with us the details of any specific schemes at this point?
At the moment, the scheme that is being considered that's coming forward first is the Cranwood scheme in Muswell Hill, which is not going to be viable without us charging London affordable rent on that. And really, we have to look at things going forward. As I've said, it's unclear about whether the GLA will allow us to use London affordable rent as something that still allows us to get the full grant. So, you know, and also as a borough, if circumstances improve, interest rates drop again, etc., then obviously circumstances will change as we go along. So it's an option, and we need to be fluid, because the main thing that we want to do and that we have to do in Haringey is we have to proceed with our house building program, because our residents are really suffering. We have such an acute shortage of council housing in Haringey, and also of council housing that is of the size that we need it. So there are other things we're thinking about. You know, Judith can talk about it, like loft conversions and back extensions. But Haringey traditionally built too many one-bedroom homes because that was viable. Now, it's easier for us to make things viable, to once again go back to building a lot of one-bedroom homes. They'll still count for the 3,000, but they're not the properties that we need. To build those larger properties, we have to do everything we can to do that, so we don't have the problems that we have.
Okay, thank you very much. And
I think Tammy wants.
So other panel members have queries on this. This is the minutes, but yes, but if you have a follow-up on that, then please go ahead.
So you say what you just said is that you don't know if the Mayor of London would accept London affordable rent and still allow you to get the grant for the properties. If these are council rents that we're talking about, London affordable rent and council rents, they're the same. So why then wouldn't you get the grant from the Mayor of London?
Because this is specifically a product that was designed by the Mayor of London to support the house building program. And there are going to be other changes within the house building program, this is not my portfolio, this is just what I know, but differences in terms of the amount of grant that will be available, etc. So we're in a specific phase of the support for council's house building programs that's coming from the GLA, but that may change, that is going to change, and that's being redeveloped for the next phase. And we don't know exactly yet, in terms of the next phase, exactly what the parameters of that are going to be. David, is there anything further that you can say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say on the specific point, the GLA have two programs basically. There's the 19 to 23 program, In that programme, London Affordable Rent is a product that they fund, which other councils are already building homes on that basis under this current programme. My understanding is that the new programme, which is the 21 to 2025 programme, will be more restrictive in terms of the tenure. So some of it will depend on under which programme are we funding the schemes. And all of that has been looked at as part of a wider housing revenue account business plan update to look at, which schemes will we build under which programmes, which will depend on, how quickly can we get on site and those sorts of things. So a lot of it is still very much under review.
Okay, thanks. Charles, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. I was just going to ask, given that obviously you've stepped in to try and expand, maybe a written brief could be provided to cover this point for the panel for the next meeting. That's number one. Again, in terms of the minutes, I don't know if we've agreed them yet. There are 2 action points at D and H. Robbie and he's not here, so I don't know if they've been provided in advance of this meeting or still to be provided.
I'll chase those up outside the meeting and send them around to you via email.
Okay, thanks. So you're asking for a written briefing on this, specifically on the use of some portion of London affordable rent from Councillor Gordon?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, if a written brief could be provided, that would be very useful for the panel in terms of deliberations going forward.
Okay, can we make that an action point then, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, right. So after that little diversion, are we happy to agree the minutes from last meeting? Yep. Okay. Minutes are agreed then. Okay, next item then, first substantive item, is an update on the insourcing of the ALMO. So, Dana, are you going to lead off on this one?
I can speak to this one and then I'll bring David up in if there are any further questions. But as the panel will know, the ALMO Homes for Haringey was officially wound down at 1 minute to midnight on the last day of May, and was insourced into the council at midnight, 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of June. The staff all transferred over at that point in time, as did the assets of Homes for Haringey, and the company was wound up. Well, not completely wound up. It's remained in a there's a small legacy company just to deal, so that contracts etc. didn't automatically come to an end, but effectively the ALMO was wound up and transferred into the council. It's been a fairly successful transfer in terms of our staff, and the majority of staff see the benefits of the fact that we can work much more closely across the piece, which is not just a financial issue. It's not about saving money, but it's about trying to provide better services. We are still working on some of the governance issues, and some of that will need changes to the constitution, etc., of the council. So, for example, Homes for Haringey had its own Finance, Risk and Audit Committee, which as a previous board member I sat on, and it's how to keep, for example, that number of audits still coming to corporate committee. But generally, it has moved over, and I think we're reaping the benefits of that now. David, is there anything further that you would like to add to that?
No, I'm happy to take questions, Councillor Carlin, but I think you covered the main bases and that are covered in the report.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, shall we take questions from the panel members? I'll start from the far end then, Charles.
Thank you for the update. I wonder if you can tell us in terms of time frame, when do you think that in terms of the systems that you would put in place to get the transfer working, how long do you think it would take? That's number one. Number two, obviously one of the reasons for bringing it back in is to simplify the systems and stuff. One of my frustrations, and I think most members' frustration, is when you put in a members' inquiries, you get told that, it's sent to the repairs, for example, one that comes to mind. You have 10 days, they respond, we've sent someone there, someone goes, and you don't get any feedback as to whether the job has been done or not. Then 10 days later, you put in another request to chase. Then they see it as a fresh members' inquiries. So it just goes on and on and on ad infinitum. So I'm just wondering, with the transfer in, has that process been looked at now that we're, more or less one organization? Because it's very frustrating that you're having to put in more and more members' inquiries on one particular issue. Thank you.
The Homes for Haringey members' inquiries doesn't exist any longer, although the emails go through to council members' inquiries, so don't get an automatic response. But they're all being dealt with by the council's members' inquiries team. Now, the issues about how we deal with members' inquiries generally is something that's being looked at in quite a lot of detail, because obviously that shouldn't happen. And it's also, I completely agree that we councillors should not have to be chasing to find out whether works have been done, and residents shouldn't be having to chase when a surveyor has come to their property and they haven't heard anything for a month, what's actually happening with their repairs. So what has happened is when Homes for Haringey came into the council, for a number of reasons, some of it to do with historical issues, some of it to do with more recent problems post-COVID, and some of it to do with the actual process of moving the Elmo and the destabilisation effect of that into the council. So there's a combination of them. But it came into the council in a weakened state, which always happens, that's standard. And the officers are working on and have produced, but are still working on, an improvement plan. And one of the core parts of that improvement plan is communication. And that is communication both with the residents, but it's also going to be communication with councillors. And that's being fleshed out at the moment. Once that improvement plan is properly formulated, there will be a kind of steering group or a working group that actually monitors that, which will hopefully include residents. But I would also anticipate that that's something that's monitored through this committee in terms of a regular report coming to this committee about how we're doing it against it will be the program and the deadlines, etc., to make sure that the improvement plan is working and things are improving. So that's part of the improvement journey. So I'm very sorry that you're still having to go through this, it's not really acceptable because you should get back, but it's a combination of our members' inquiry system at the moment, but also our part of the communications for the council. It's part of complaints. Members' inquiries is the same kind of thing as complaints. People might complain through an MP, through a councillor, or formal complaint. It's all part of the same system, and how we deal with the comms around that. Not the comms, but the communication around that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, just to say that you suggested that we receive a regular report on progress, and I've already asked for our next meeting to have a report on repairs. So that's great. Thanks for that. So Charles, you had a follow up.
Just to follow up, maybe obviously thanks for that explanation. The first point that I made, maybe I didn't make it myself quite clear, which you touched on, is in terms of the transition and the various works going on. Is there an action plan to complete as to when various aspects of the transfer in will be completed?
Yes, all Homes for Haringey no longer exists.
No, I understand that. We are now in the council. It's not. Look, I am quite clear that Homes for Haringey doesn't exist anymore. So everything goes to the council. Yeah, so that's fine. In terms of the way that Homes for Haringey used to work, and in terms of the improvement that we expect in terms of having brought it in, is there an action plan to ensure that the transition and the work that you are doing, is happening? That's what I'm asking.
Yes, this is part of the action plan and the improvement plan that we're expected to see.
Okay. Are you able to share that with the plan with the panel?
Yes, it is being fleshed out at the moment. So there are how many headlines, David? 40.
Yeah, well, actually, I think across all of the areas, there's around 80 projects actually. But the intention is to bring the improvement plan to cabinet, so we will be obviously sharing it publicly. We are obviously just working it out with staff, because I think one of the things that we see as a really important principle is that the staff that we brought into the council kind of own this journey as well, because there's a lot of ideas coming from staff about how they want to see improvement. I think also what we're seeing by being all part of one organisation is that staff are working together more on the solutions. So some of the issues around repairs, and Judith knows this well, is about the relationship between the repairs team and actually the call centre. And so, how we triage, what is an emergency job, for instance, and actually the communication in the past was perhaps not always brilliant on that. So the two teams are working together on how can we improve that flow of information, learn from cases that have gone wrong and get it right. So that's one example of an improvement project that's already underway.
Thank you for that. So what would be useful then, through you, Chair, is maybe you could share with us some key milestones in terms of where you're heading, in terms of the journey. That would be very useful. Thank you.
Certainly, what officers are working on at the moment is obviously, as David has said, there are about 80 actions. That's a lot. So what I've asked for, which officers are doing, is to actually prioritize among those 80. What are the things we really need to see improving quickly? And we need to be putting effort into that. And so to actually look at, work on everything, but what are we, a kind of prioritization structure. But as soon as it's ready to be shared, it absolutely will be shared. And as I've said, it would be useful for this committee to have like every 6 months or something, but that you can actually also get a report to see how it's doing, because as a scrutiny panel, you would be scrutinizing the improvements going forward.
Okay, well, we'll keep that on our radar then. And obviously, we would like to see that when it's ready. Okay, thank you. Dawn, you had a question.
I did. It's sort of been answered. I just wanted to ask how the integration of customer services were going. And I think you can't yet give us full information on that, but we'll just mark that to follow up on regularly as well.
Okay, fantastic. Mark, you're next on my list.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Ajay picked one of my points up, but I just wonder if we could get some specifics on the action plan, when that will be ready. Just a couple of other points. One on staffing. We've said a lot of really positive things in terms of moving over from the outsourced provider, bringing it in-house. Are we looking at ways of measuring that in terms of all the points that have been raised in terms of better internal communications, getting things done, etc.? Because at the moment it can just sound like anecdote. It'd be great if you were doing some surveys with staff to try and measure that. And my last point was, I do recollect from the 2014-2018 administration that there was a review done, I think, which estimated that we could save something in the region of £500,000 a year by bringing the housing service back in-house. When are we going to be in a situation or in a position when you can give us some details in terms of the savings that we've made through this process? Thanks.
Bringing Homes for Haringey in-house was never actually going to release £500,000 a year. It has not provided those savings in other boroughs, and certainly not at the moment. Our most important, well, there are two things. First of all, the housing revenue account is slightly separate, as you know, from the council's main revenue, the council's main revenue account. So, and Homes for Haringey as well was not an ALMO. Some ALMOs were set up with nothing to do with the council. They were completely separate. To quote a previous officer, Homes for Haringey was set up as an ALMO with a very short arm. So it was arm's length, but the arm was very short. So it was already fairly integrated into the council. Our main priority has to be to provide the best possible housing services to our residents, number one. And any savings that come thereafter by us, you know, we already have made savings by the council providing services and by the structures that were there before. So personally, it's unlikely we're just going to recognise £500,000 in savings because that's a target. Our target is to provide the best possible services to our residents, and we've got a long way to go on that. Once we know that our services are really, you know, renowned and the best possible services for our residents, well, then we'll look and see where we are. But certainly my priority is that we just provide the best services, and we've got a way to go on that.
Okay, thank you.
If you don't mind, Chair.
No, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement with that in terms that it would be good, I think, to just see what the numbers kind of look like, sort of moving over. And obviously, if there are any savings made, you know, I'd be the first one to say to plough that back into, you know, improving the service provision.
Sorry, once again, the housing services are paid for by the housing revenue account. And so the housing revenue account washes its face and pays for housing services. There isn't necessarily a saving to the council in terms of the housing revenue account. So what we have to do within the housing revenue account is make sure our homes have been brought up to the best possible standards with a major capital works program, the interest on which is going to have to be paid for, and to make sure, etc., and to make sure that we are providing from the rent that people pay the best possible services that they can get. That's not going to deliver a saving, I don't think, unless I'm incorrect on this, to the council's revenue account, any more than we have got some savings to the council's revenue account because they're joined up services through things like the contact centre, the ASB team, you know, park services, etc. But other than that, we're not, you know, they're two separate accounts. My understanding. David may correct me on this.
No, I think that position you've reported is essentially right. I mean, I think we need to remember as well that the model that we went for was to largely lift and shift services into the council because we didn't want to put people's jobs at risk through the process of the transfer. I think what is true to say, though, and just building on your point, is that over time we will do service reviews as part of the improvement plan to look at whether services are fit for purpose, and inevitably, you know, where we find perhaps duplication in roles across the council as we do those service reviews, we would hopefully free up resources to put back into services to residents. So it might be to improve our offer around something like antisocial behaviour, for instance. And certainly I would, as part of the improvement plan, the service reviews that we are doing, I think we'll throw up those opportunities to make sure that the money that we've got in the housing revenue account is being spent on the right things. And I think the fact that we're now all part of one organisation should open up those opportunities. But you are essentially correct, and I think also it was right that we didn't throw everything up in there when we decided to bring it in-house. We wanted to protect jobs and actually minimise the amount of change for staff at that stage, because it was also a period of quite a lot of uncertainty.
Okay, thank you. Khaled, you were next on my list. Just before I bring you in, just wanted, as an aside, I think you're the third cabinet member I've heard in recent days refer to a scheme being self-funding, with the metaphor of washing your face, which is actually a metaphor I most strongly associate with former leader of the council, Joe Ejiofor. But that's funny. I don't know why everyone suddenly started using that metaphor. Anyway, Khaled, your question.
It's obviously catchy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, when we look back at Homes for Haringey, the main issue was with the really poor service that tenants were getting. Repairs weren't getting done. We know this because of the casework that we used to handle. I know this also because my parents are, council tenants. Now that it's gone in-house, with the council now is what used to be Homes for Haringey, we still continue to get those problems. So I want to understand, when can we see a reduction in those kind of casework inquiries that we used to get about repairs not being done, properties in a terrible state? But when can we expect that? That's the first question. And also the second question is, if the tenants are asking me, well, it's the same people that used to run Homes for Haringey. They've just transferred over to the council. What's the difference? How are the same people going to make a difference? So I would appreciate if I could get a response that I can take back to tenants. Thank you.
Well, first of all, it's not the same people, because by bringing the Elmo in-house, two things have happened. First of all, it comes within the corporate structure of the council. So it's not the same people, because at the very end of it, the person, it's David, but also the chief exec. So it's not the same people at all. It's a completely different structure in terms of people. And the second thing is that obviously it's now under political control. It's under myself and the leader and the cabinet. So in terms of who's it's under, in terms of that, that's changed because you bring the Elmo in-house. In terms of, are things going to get better? Yes, they are. But unfortunately, and I am very impatient, and officers will attest to that, possibly too impatient, it's going to take time. And it's going to take time because they're backlogs. It's going to take time because of all kinds of, just very, problems that we're in. It's going to take time in terms of culture change. And it's going to take, we didn't bring in a high-performing Elmo. By the time the Elmo came in, it was not high-performing. So we are expecting, not all Elmos come in and perform better, but the ones that are performing poorly tend to get better. And it will get better. But unfortunately, it is going to take time. It's not going to be overnight. We're doing whatever we can. Senior officers are doing whatever they can. But what we have to tell residents is, please be patient. It is going to take time. If there are repairs that are dangerous or cause consequential damage, please push those as councillors, because we need to prioritise them. But these things take time. Judith will come in on the repair service. Thank you.
Can I just make one other point just to sort of tee Judith up, but I think it's a really important one that Judith's making a lot of progress on, which is one of the reasons progress is not as slow as it's not as quick as we would like it to be, is that a lot of our stock is in poor condition and has not had the level of investment it needs over a very long period. It's a generational period of underinvestment, actually, and we are changing that. And actually, the level of spend is going up year on year, actually, under Judith's leadership, and it is really about to sort of step up again next year and the year after, and that's about the planned investment program, where we go in and really do a sort of comprehensive overhaul on estates. You know, we've got ones on site like Turner Avenue and Imperial Wharf, and there are a number of other ones to come. Knoll Park is finally on site as well. Although obviously, as this committee knows, it's not been without its issues. We are finally, and you know from your ward, we are finally getting on with that, and I think that will make a big difference, because a lot of the repairs do come back to the poor historic condition of the stock. So I think that's the first thing to say. The other thing, just to build on what Councillor Carlin said, is that there are quite a lot of cultural issues around things like making sure that, you know, residents don't have to have several different operatives come to deal with one job, and that's something that Judith is turning around with the teams, but it will take time to skill the workforce up as well. It's not an overnight thing, but it's something that Judith's absolutely got underway as part of an improvement plan. So I suppose it's just to sort of give reassurance that we are absolutely on this, but some of the changes are not quick fixes, and some of them will take a number of years, actually, if we're being realistic. But certainly recognising we've got a lot to do, and that's absolutely what we are doing.
Yeah, just want to come back. I think Councillor Carlin mentioned that it's not the same people. Yes, the people at the top are not the same people. But when the tenant rings up, it's not Denise or David or Hannah who picks up the phone. It's the same people that they used to deal with at Homes of Haringey who probably pick up the phone. It's the same managers. And you know, really what we want to know is, okay, fair enough, you know, the people at the top have changed. But at the ground level, what is it? Can I take back? Because, you know, I'm not exaggerating this. In my next surgery, that's what we're going to get. Somebody coming. The other thing is, you also said, you know, where we have people coming to councillors, and, you know, we can escalate or we can emphasize certain things, but not everybody is coming to councillors.
Of course.
We're only seeing maybe a fraction of people who have the knowledge, the wherewithal to, you know, turn up to a councillor surgery or email. A lot of people don't even know that option is available to them. So that shouldn't even be something that tenants have to do. You know, they should just be able to report a repair or whatever it is, and it should be dealt with.
Could I just ask, when
I completely agree with the one to bring to
just bear for a moment, just a procedural thing. When you're not actually speaking, if you could switch your microphone off, because that affects what people are seeing on the screen when they so just only have your microphone on when you're actually speaking, please. Thank you.
Councillor Mead, I completely agree with you. I entirely agree with you, and that's why we have an improvement plan. Because, and in terms of yes, they're still the same staff that they're dealing with, but leadership is really important, and because leadership set a culture and they set an expectation, and we've got a strong leadership team. We have just appointed an operations director, who I think is going to be very good to support the team as well. So, you know, these things are important, and we are developing. We have Judith. We have a new operation director starting. We have David. Leadership is important, and that will then change the culture of the workforce more generally. But I will hand over to Judith just in terms of repairs, because I think we need to say a bit about that.
So I am bringing you a detailed report to the next meeting. So we've got a really detailed repairs improvement programme of work being undertaken, which is starting with the call centre, looking at that whole customer journey in terms of getting that diagnostic right at first point of contact. But also we're reviewing all of our systems and processes as part of that, because we are really understanding that a lot of the fundamentals within the repair service need to be improved, so we can track the examples that you've given about difficult cases through to completion, be able to give people real detail. But there's a big cultural piece that, picking up on what David and Councillor Carlin have said, which is a lot of our staff have only worked within Homes for Haringey. We've had quite a significant sort of change at leadership level and actually increasingly within the back office. But actually there's a real piece of work with people understanding what our expectations are about the services we deliver to our residents, but also how they use the systems correctly to make sure things like follow-on jobs are raised and those kind of things. So we are undertaking a really enormous piece of work to really fundamentally change the way we deliver the service, and also from the first point of contact to our first line managers also being able to address those issues with some of the team members to make sure that we are getting the service that customers should have.
Okay, thank you very much. Holly, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the ratio of managerial staff to operational staff within the former Homes for Haringey staff group, and whether there are any plans to change that as part of those reviews.
I haven't seen that kind of analysis and asked that question in that way. It's an interesting question, and actually one is we do our service reviews, and we are at the moment looking at a sort of revised structure in Judith's area, for instance, and what will work best, and it's the sort of question we'll ask as we go through that. And I don't know the answer to the ratio, so sorry I can't give you that, but I would say from my experience looking at it, there are parts of Homes for Haringey which are not adequately where staff are not adequately supervised actually and don't have the level of support I would expect to see compared with what I'm used to in a local authority setting, more on the housing management side actually. And I think we'll want to redress some of that. But there probably may be other areas where the ratios are a bit higher than we'd expect. But these are all the sorts of things we'll look at as we go through the service reviews.
Okay, thank you. Charles, you had a final brief contribution before we move on to the next item.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think it's thanks for all the answers and the point made by Judith, I think. Yeah. One of the things I think, obviously, it's probably part of the 800 or so or 80 that you're looking at, is the relationship with contractors, because they are the ones that when you send them to not having a DSO, they go out, they look at the stuff and they say, oh, yes, this needs to be done. It takes sometimes time to go ahead to do the job. And I don't think there is anyone monitoring, because that's what I've picked up. So yes, everything is back in-house. You still have the same contractors. They still have the same cultural attitude and stuff like that. So I don't know if you've got someone actually looking at that. I know you said you've now appointed an operations person. Maybe that's to work with Judy to ensure that, once the work goes out, if it's done, that there is always that feedback, because it helps us as a local ward councillors, the council as well, because I think being on the ground, we know that there are issues there. It's sometimes the contractor blames the council, and sometimes the council blames the contractor. So I don't know if that's been looked at from a communications and service level agreement point of view. When you give work to Civil Warm or whatever they are called to do a piece of work, and whether that loop, as part of the stuff is dealt with,
So just in terms of repairs, we don't actually have a huge amount of subcontracting. Most of the work's done in-house. Over 80% of the work's done in-house. We have had some issues with supply chain, which is not unusual at the moment because there is a massive market shortage in terms of, sorry, supply chain means contractors, subcontractors. And we are, as part of the improvement work, actually developing a procurement strategy to work with more local, smaller businesses rather than bringing in management contractors who we don't feel work. It doesn't work very well for us as an in-house repairs service. And also on the plan works, which is obviously the other big part of it, we got the approval back from Cabinet in July to move into the partnering contracts, which we have published the public information notice on, which is the thing that's saying we're going out to tender. And we'll be looking to have long-term relationships with those people. So we would expect that relationship to really change from the historic one we've had where we're having to do quite a lot of contract variations. So we're looking at it from the plan works point of view, but also from the repairs point of view of actually having a different type of supply chain in terms of what we do. But really our intention is to deliver as much as we sensibly can in-house.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks. So we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is, just find the right place in my papers. It's item 8, temporary accommodation standards and compliance. Okay. Donna, you are also the responsible cabinet member for this.
I will introduce this. You have a detailed report on the standards and compliance that we expect from our temporary accommodation. We have different kinds of temporary accommodation and different ways of dealing with that. So we have some accommodation that we hire on a nightly basis, and quite a lot of our temporary accommodation residents are in that accommodation, and that is inspected, etc. And the whoever manages that is responsible for repairs and conditions. We then have longer term properties that we have rented from a private landlord for a period of years, and that accommodation we maintain. And if people report repairs, etc., that comes to us. But I will hand over to Denise on this to go through the report in a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Councillor Collins said, what the report looks to do is to describe the different temporary accommodation types, because each type comes with slightly different responsibilities that we have and that the owner has. So hopefully the report seeks to do that. The appendices cover this in a lot more detail. They were just there for information for anyone who wanted that level of detail. But just to say, to draw attention to a couple of things, as Councillor Collins said, we are heavily reliant on nightly paid accommodation currently, and that is largely provided by comparatively large providers who have portfolios of properties, their own kind of repairs, setups, their own sort of approach to compliance. And in that setting, we do sort of checks against that, as opposed to the leases where we take responsibility of that property for the 3 or the 5 years of the lease. I would just draw attention to the little section about setting the standard, which is a kind of London-wide initiative round condition. And I'm drawing attention to this in this particular report because, as I said at the last meeting, for the first time in a long time, we have families in bed and breakfast, and setting the standard does inspections around both nightly paid accommodation and also hotels. So I just wanted to draw attention to that because we are a part of that sort of process. Otherwise, maybe it's best to take questions.
Great, thank you very much for that report. Okay, Dawn, if you'd like to lead off.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand a bit more about the nightly purchase annexes, because in 5.2.1 it says they're used for overnight accommodation or for a longer period, which could be a significantly longer period, and it sounds like it's just a single night, but it clearly isn't. So how long are people in there on average? And I appreciate there's probably more people now being put into temporary accommodation because of the current cost of living and other situations. We're 50% reliant on those, more than 50%. So what can be done to reduce that at a quicker rate? And I know we're trying to build council homes and so on, but that's a lot of people in what I assume is some of the worst accommodation at a rough guess.
So the nightly paid accommodation, so it's called nightly paid because of the relationship with the landlord and the way that we pay for it. So the arrangement is a kind of night by night one. Historically, nightly paid accommodation would have been the kind of first place that people went to when they first moved into temporary accommodation, and you'd be looking to move people through into a more settled and leased solution. In reality, currently people can stay nightly paid for years. It isn't short term anymore because of the lack of more settled options for people to sort of move on to. And what you kind of see, I guess, with temporary accommodation is your leased landlords tend to be people who want that reassurance of giving the property to the council for 3 or 5 years. We do the repairs at the end, we do dilapidations, and we give it back to you. So quite often the kind of smaller landlords who don't want to be that involved, want the reassurance of the property being looked after, accept as a result a slightly lower rent than they could maybe get otherwise, though still quite substantial. Whereas nightly paid landlords are more prepared to take the risk. They kind of scale up to do this, and you can live with a bit of turnover and a bit of movement. In reality, there's not lots of movement at the moment because there is such a shortage of supply. But what we've seen as the market has been kind of buoyant is landlords moving into the nightly paid sector and away from leasing. So if we'd have looked at this maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been almost 50-50 around leasing and nightly paid, but we've seen a real fall off in the kind of leasing side. Nightly paid is the thing that until recently was always available. So if we need supply, that's where we go. We did have a plan to reduce nightly paid, and it is reducing slightly. But at the moment, it's a question of supply, as we touched on in the last meeting. So that's been the shift a little bit.
And as I come back, as we discussed in the last meeting, unfortunately, the position that we're in at the moment is we just have an acute shortage of being able to find private sector accommodation to use as temporary accommodation. And officers are literally looking at everything that we can do to source as much accommodation that we own, to convert some properties that are hard to let, for example, properties that we own. So what we're doing now is that if there's a hard to let property and nobody actually wants it, people go and view it, our residents go and view it, and nobody takes it, well, then we're going to use it as temporary accommodation. So because we need to get it let, we can't leave these properties void. And also, there might be nothing wrong with the property, whatever reasons people have, but it's probably still going to be better than a lot of the private sector private sector accommodation we're able to get. So we're doing everything that we can to increase the amount of accommodation that we have, but it is critical. It's not just critical in Haringey, it's critical across London. So we're looking at everything that we can do. So until it stabilizes, we unfortunately are going to be having to use the nightly purchase annexes. But I do completely agree, this is something that we need to try to wind down because it's very, very expensive. And so we're looking at everything we can do as well to reduce the costs of our temporary accommodation. So that's one of the reasons as well.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, a very slightly unrelated follow-up, because this is about the quality of those properties. But how many more people roughly are we seeing looking for temporary accommodation at the moment? What's the increase?
So we see just over 4,000 households a year approaching some form of threat of homelessness. Some of that can be resolved through negotiation with landlords, mediation with parents, things like that. So we place round about 50 or so people a week into temporary accommodation. That's the sort of scale. That's gone up a little bit recently because, as we discussed at the last meeting, we now don't have private sector accommodation to help people at the front line, so to move from one private sector to let to another. So we're seeing a slight increase at the moment, but roughly we place around about 15 new households a month. Sorry.
So there's no significant change despite the cost of living issues at the moment. It's about the same every week.
The pressures have gone up in terms of people sort of coming and approaching us, and placements are up slightly at the moment. We do expect that to sort of continue though, because what we're finding in addition to the kind of threat of homelessness at the front door, and one of our biggest issues is, as I think I touched on last time, landlords wanting to sell and realise their assets at the moment because they don't know what's going to happen in the market. So we do anticipate that going up quite significantly.
Sorry, before I bring Tammy in, because I know Tammy's got a question, just on our reliance on the nightly paid accommodation. So I know, Dana, you said that it's a lot more expensive. It isn't actually set out, I don't think, in the report what the relative cost is. So it'd be good to get some idea. Seeing as we were talking about people living in this type of accommodation for extended periods, perhaps years, what the relative cost is for nightly paid for a month compared to the other types that are there. And just in addition to that, I mean, I understand originally the idea of this was a kind of emergency accommodation just for a few nights. So it makes sense that it's more expensive because you'd just be booking it for a family or for a night or 2 nights. But how is it possible that how have we got to a situation where providers are able to kind of insist on renting out this accommodation on this nightly paid rate? Why can't councils who are providing their business collectively act to insist that actually we pay a reasonable rate for the accommodation that we're using? I'd just like to get some idea of how we've got to that situation where so much of our money that's coming from council tax is going into. Sorry, apologies. Is this from the HRA or the general fund? It's the general fund, isn't it? Yeah. So it is council tax money. It's a big drain on our revenue budget. That's going because of the model by which we're kind of being forced by these providers to pay for this temporary accommodation. Thanks.
So on the first point about cost, the report concentrated on condition, but I can bring that. We've got kind of quite detailed breakdown of each type of temporary accommodation by cost and doing it as a kind of unit cost. I suppose the difference between the properties that we lease is that we do the repairs, we do the housing management, whereas with nightly paid, the agents do all of that. They're responsible for eviction, so we just end and they have to deal with that. So I can bring something that compares them like for like, if that's helpful. London-wide, through London councils, all the boroughs look to act together to try and make a stance on nightly paid accommodation, firstly around cost. So we have an agreement that we won't outbid each other for accommodation, and there's a kind of rate per borough that we're allowed to pay. So we looked to bring down cost in that sort of sense by working together. We also look to make a bit of a stance around, we prefer leases. In reality, the current situation is that we sort of lack supply. And so in order of preference, and I could maybe bring in future, we've got a supply plan that sort of prioritises the types of supply we like. So we prefer things in our own stock, as Councillor Carlin said. We then prefer leasing, so we've reviewed our lease offer to see if we can get more landlords to work with us on a longer term basis to try and make nightly paid very much the last resort. But we are at the moment pretty sort of tied by the market, unfortunately. But I could bring something in detail that explains all of that to a future meeting if that was helpful.
Yeah, that could be helpful. Yep, okay. Thank you very much for that. Tammy, you had a question.
Yeah, it was around the use of commercial hotels, because I can see that that's not really included in terms of the inspection of standards information in the pack. I guess my question is, why has it come to us using commercial hotels? Is this a relatively novel thing, or has this been going on for some years? And on top of that, it would be useful to understand what's the average length of stay for someone in a hotel, and approximately how much a night it costs compared to the nightly paid accommodation.
So it's a comparatively new thing. So we hadn't had anyone in B&B other than the very odd family who approached us really late in the day, and we didn't have something just for the night until the following day, until comparatively recently. So I'd say this has been an issue for the last 3 or 4 months. And what we do normally for nightly paid, usually, which is a hot resort, we have as I describe in here, a dynamic purchasing system. We go on the system, we look for properties, and that's how we find nightly paid. Currently, there is very little on the nightly paid system. So when it comes to placing a family that we've got a statutory responsibility for, if we've got no spaces in any of the other forms of temporary accommodation, then we will book a hotel. People's state varies. It can be a few nights depending on the need of the family. The legal responsibility is for people not to stay in B&B for longer than 6 weeks, which is what we comply with currently, though we are in a sort of challenging position on that. I don't know the rate off the top of my head, but I can send that in answer to a question maybe. I can't remember the hotel rate at the moment. But it will be more expensive than nightly paid, obviously.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, if I could just come in.
Oh, yes, please do.
Sorry, officers are in a really difficult position, and we have to understand that these are not just choices that we're making because we want to make them. Nobody's going, oh, well, we'll just put somebody in a hotel. It's because when they look, there's absolutely nothing available. And it's not even just that there's nothing available in Haringey. They can't find any accommodation at all. And I don't know what's going to happen in London, because it's become so critical. There's so many landlords selling up that we're getting, stories about people who, just house shares, etc., where landlords have sold up, and then people who are living in that house share, they can't find anywhere else to live. It's not just, there was a report on student accommodation out of London somewhere. They were queuing around the blocks. That's kind of what we're starting to see in places like London. Accommodation, personally, I think we've just relied for far too long on people just being able to find private rented accommodation, and and the country's been far too heavily reliant on that, propped up by housing benefits. And now that's coming home to roost to a certain extent. So now, landlords are selling up for all kinds of reasons. They're selling up because of housing market. They're selling up because of the renters bill going through. They're selling up, because interest rates have gone up and they can no longer get rents that'll cover their mortgages, etc., etc. But it is critical, and I'm quite concerned that, what are we going to have? Tented cities? Like, what are we going to do in a place like London? For all kinds of people. So it's critical. It's very, very bad. As a council, we just have to secure as much accommodation that we own as possible. It's our only option.
I did just mean to add on the inspection of hotels, the setting the standard approach that I mentioned, the Pan-London approach. We pay a fee, a membership fee, and then there is a team of inspectors who work across London, and they concentrate on B&B, because often more than one borough will use sort of hotels, and they also inspect studios. So the inspection regime for hotels plays at that sort of London sort of level, and they report back to us and grade each property.
It's not. It's caseworkers illustrative of a wider problem. But I mean, in one example, a person basically, the landlord has decided that they want to sell up, but the person is still in the property. The council can't find anywhere else for him to stay. The landlord's refusing to do repairs. So then they're in a kind of middle situation where they're in a property that's completely inappropriate, but also can't move because of the lack of alternative accommodation, particularly for larger families. I'm just interested in what enforcement powers we have and how often those are actually used against temporary accommodation providers.
So in terms of temporary accommodation providers like the sort of nightly paid ones, then we still work very closely with the housing improvement team around standards. I don't know whether the example you gave was a private tenant who was being evicted and then being moved on, but certainly for that period of eviction, you know, the tenant still has the right to reasonable repairs and to live in that place in comfort. So we would look to take action on that basis. But I don't know if you want to share the case and I could just look. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mark, you have a question?
It's just a follow-up, Chair, on a point you raised around the finances, which I just want to support, but it'd also be useful to basically get an overview in terms of how the overall costs of this to the council. Thanks.
Great. Yes. If we could have a kind of overview of the costs to the council budget of these different various types of temporary accommodation, that would be really helpful, really illuminating. So if we make that an action point, thank you very, very much. Okay, thanks panel for your questions. Thank you very much for the answers. I think I'm right in thinking, Denise and Judith, I don't think do you need to be here for the remain? Aids and adaptations. Okay, all right. Sorry, I was going to excuse you, but okay. Let's press on. Let's press on quickly. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is item 9, which is the Haringey Community Benefit Society. So Donna, would you like to introduce this one?
A decision was taken a number of years ago to set up the Haringey Community Benefit Society, which, for those who may not know, purchases properties that we're able to purchase with right to buy receipts. And then what we actually do is we hold them within the society, and we use them effectively for a form of temporary accommodation. So they're not council properties per se. This is a good use of the receipts, and it's one of the ways that we can own our own temporary accommodation. I'll let Denise come in with more of the details in time. We can take questions on it.
So this will be my item. No, that's fine. So this report was really a kind of add-on report to the previous report around how we make sure that these homes, that are technically kind of homes in the private rented sector, that we're kind of assured that there are good standards in those homes. We wanted to kind of keep the homes that are leased to the CBS a bit separate from other kinds of temporary accommodation, because there's a very different relationship between the council and the CBS. But yeah, Councillor Collins' introduction is completely correct. So the CBS was set up in 2018, so 4 years ago now, and it was set up so that the council through the HRA could acquire homes. Those homes are mostly buybacks of homes that had previously been bought under the right to buy. And those homes, the kind of business model that we've established, those homes are then leased to the Haringey Community Benefit Society. Haringey Community Benefit Society, it's an independent organisation, and its objective is to provide housing to households in Haringey who are in housing need. The households who are housed in those homes are nominated to the Haringey Community Benefit Society by the council, and there is an agreement between the CBS and the council for the council to undertake works on the properties when they're required to ensure they're brought up to the lettable standard agreed. I think that's probably it.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, panel members, do we have any questions from panel members on this? Okay, Mark, I see you first.
Can someone just give us a succinct reminder how the money works around all this, how it's all funded?
So just the kind of process for how these homes are financed. So they're acquired using right to buy receipts, and so they're acquired in the HRA using right to buy receipt. The home itself is then leased to the CBS for initially a 7-year period, and then the CBS then lets out that home to residents.
Any more questions? Okay. No, the panel. Oh, sorry, Holly, you have a question.
So it's just about the process at the end of the 7 years. So when it reverts back, the homes revert back to being council homes, do the same people stay in them, or would the person in temporary accommodation be moved?
That's a good question. Obviously, we haven't actually yet come to that end of that 7-year period yet. Currently, just to kind of say a bit about the kind of tenancy those people are on, they're on initially 2-year tenancies, which then become periodic tenancies. If at the end of that 7-year period, when we get to the end of one of those 7-year periods, those homes become go back into the HRA and become council homes, then they would be let as council homes, and it would depend on the households who are kind of at the top of the priority for new council housing. As I said, we haven't yet got to one of those ends of those 7-year leases to the HCBS. So we'll kind of look to revisit that when we get there in about 2 years' time or so.
Thanks. So it's my fault for having my phone so close. It's impossible to have it not close to one microphone or another. Did you have a follow-up on that, or I can certainly follow up? Yeah. So I suppose, and maybe I don't know if this is a question for you, Hannah, as an officer, or maybe it's a question for Dana as the political lead. But I suppose what's playing on my mind is what happened. Yeah, when you get to the end of that period, and the person who's living in that house is not eligible for that council home, what is going to happen to them? Are we going to evict them, or do we have a policy on this, or are we restricted by legislation? Just some clarity on that.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke slightly incorrectly before because they're not temporary tenants. Obviously, they're effectively they're renting properties from us, which made it affordable for us to pay for the accommodation using, once again, for the rents to cover the amount. So they're renting the properties from us. We don't have a policy on that at the moment, and as Hannah said, this is something that we are going to have to consider. When the society was set up, this wasn't considered, so this wasn't actually something that when we set this up and decided to do this wasn't part of the original policy. I know Dad's going, what? Holly's going, what? It's true, it wasn't. So this is something that we're going to have to really think about how we're going to deal with it, because obviously we accepted a duty to these residents. We discharge duty by placing them into effectively discharge duty into the private sector, by placing them in these high quality homes, which probably much higher quality than, and at better rental, at affordable rents than if they'd gone redischarge duty into other homes within the private sector. Certainly I know, for example, the ones in Muswell Hill are wonderful. And the decision is that once the policy decision has been that once these were effectively paid off to the extent that they could now be able to be paid for by council rents, formula rents, after that number of years, they'd move back into the council. So no, at the moment, there's no policy. This is something that we're going to have to develop fairly quickly. We are 4 years in, so within the next couple of years. And this is going to have to be something that we think about, Matt, because we have so much need and housing need, and people who, this is part of our development of a new allocation policy and how we deal with that. And if there are people who are living in these properties, for example, who no longer in priority need and aren't in housing need and can afford private rented, for example, then do they take, these are all decisions that we're going to have to look at in terms of a policy. But the policy obviously hasn't been properly thought out or developed yet. But it's something that we have to get onto, and it will be something that we need to look at as part of our allocations policy. What happens to people who've been there? Do these properties go back into the list? Do they convert to council homes, and then the people who've been living them get those homes? At the moment, I don't have an answer for you. All I can say is these are policies that have to be developed.
And is that policy in development now? Because I know things don't happen that quickly in a council. If we're looking at people who in 3 years' time will be reaching the end of their tenancies, there really needs to be a policy in development now. So what's the time frame for that, and when are we going to have a chance to look at that policy?
Sorry, I kept my thing up, my speaker on, a microphone on. We are at present busy developing a new allocations policy to deal with everything, a completely new allocations policy to deal with how we allocate council homes. So this will be part of it. Has to be, because part of our allocation policy. So it will be something that we're thinking about at the moment. The allocation policy is being developed, but to ensure that we map individual need, there are a whole lot of reasons why we have to have a new allocation policy, and that is being developed. Once it's got to a once we've got a policy in place, officers are working on it, then we will be able to share it and go out to consultation, etc., etc. But obviously we have to have something in place in advance, as everybody knows, well in advance, so within the next couple of years. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So it's the new housing allocations policy will be part of that, right? Thanks. Apologies. The point about the microphone, it's because the camera points at whoever's microphone is on, so the people are looking online. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Tammy.
Just an issue with this as well is that if we've discharged duty to them, they're not going to have been bidding for the past 7 years on the waiting list. So that means that an equivalent family who are given temporary accommodation and have been waiting 7 years are going to have higher priority, right, for that. So these people who have been there for 7 years, they're going to get to the end of it and they're not going to have any priority from accumulated bidding on the list. And they're also going to be evicted effectively.
This would work. The same thing would apply to anybody who has where somebody's become homeless and has been discharged into private sector, or somebody who becomes homeless who doesn't ever make a homelessness application and move seamlessly into another private sector property and aren't actually in housing need. We have huge need in Haringey. We have very high levels of children with disabilities, etc. And somehow we're never going to be able to house everybody. That's the reality. We just aren't. And so part of what we're going to have to do is think about, as a borough, as politicians in terms of political lead, with our officers, and think about how are we going to prioritize social housing in the borough? And that's part of what the allocation system has to look at, because we have very high levels of need. And there are people who can manage in the private rented sector. Also, what is probably going to happen, which will be a game changer, is if the renters' white paper goes through, private renters' white paper, and becomes law, which is going through at the moment, Gove is back in place, that will bring back assured tenancies. That will mean that although If you're in breach of tenancy, they will make it easier to evict people. So ground 8 will stay, but other things will make it easier to evict if you're in breach of tenancy. If you're not in breach of tenancy, there will be very limited, there are limited reasons. They bring back effectively assured tenancies. There are limited reasons why a landlord can evict you. It will only be on the basis of wanting to sell, needing the property for themselves or for a family member, and there will be limits who will have to move in within a few months or sell within a few months. And there will be a form of rent control in that landlords will not be able to put up the rent higher than market rent. So that will provide a certain amount of security of tenure within the private rented sector. So we're going to see things changing quite a lot, and it will create, although there'll be fewer private rented properties, I'm sure, as we're seeing, it will create security of tenure within the private rented sector. A lot of people want a council home, not because they can't afford to be in, to even pay market rent, but because they desperately want security of tenure. If you've got your child at school and then you're evicted, you see it popping up on social media. Does anybody know of any properties to rent in this area? Because the children at the local school, they're part of a community, they've suddenly lost their home because there is no security of tenure, and then they can't get another home in the area at all. So there are various reasons, but security of tenure is one of them, a very substantial driver because if you don't own a house, the only other way you have security of tenure if you don't own it is in social sector.
Okay, thanks. It does appear to me that we're kind of putting a lot of hope in a plan for regulating the tenancy law that was put together, 2 prime ministers ago now are we talking about? Oh, do we know, have we had any indication yet whether the new government is likely to be going forward with this plan?
This is Gove's white paper and he's back in place.
Okay. Right. Do we have any more questions on this? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Denise and Hannah, I think you can go and enjoy whatever's left of your evening. Thank you very much for coming today. Okay. We've got one more paper on the agenda this evening, which is on aids and adaptations. So, Dana, as always this evening, this comes under your portfolio. You've got a lot of stuff under your portfolio. Yeah, you've a big portfolio. Yeah. Okay. So, would you like to introduce it, and obviously with support from officers?
Aids and adaptation sits. It sits with 2 different teams. So it's the aids and adaptations historically and generally sits within adults, and so aids and adaptations are provided to housing that isn't just council housing stock. That sits within adults. However, historically there's always been a backlog. It's difficult, and so Homes for Haringey set up their own team to do aids and adaptations with occupational therapists who then made the recommendations for it to be done in-house. It still actually exists in 2 different places, which is why we have somebody from adults and we have Judith from repairs, and possibly it's one of the things that with Homes for Haringey coming in-house, we'll start to work more closely together. In terms of housing services, it's excellent. So for example, the Knoll Park pods, what happened on the Knoll Park estate is that the occupational therapist worked with the residents on the estate, looked at their physical needs going forward and ensured, because they put in bathrooms and kitchens, so they ensured not just looking at what they needed now, but what they may need in the future. So they made sure that the pods that were brought in, which are, which are really not, they're not pods because I had imagined them as little pods. They're actually modular extensions. The modular extensions were ordered with the adaptions already installed for the residents who needed them or who were going to need them going forward. So this is how, you know, so it is really successful, and it is one of the things with Homes for Haringey having come back in. If we can work more closely with adults to actually provide the adaptions, then we can see economies across that. But I'll leave it to these two officers to pick up.
Do you want to go first?
Hi, yeah, so I'm from Adult Social Care. And as councillors described, we do adaptations for people who we see in our service who may approach us for care and support, and we identify following an occupational therapy assessment that they would benefit from not just major adaptations but minor adaptations as well. And there's the report sort of outlines how we do that across 10 years, and it's the same. So regardless of people if they're a privately owned property, whether they are a council tenant or a registered social landlord like a housing association, the process we undertake is the same. It's just where the budget comes from to pay for those. So we have two separate ones with the Disabled Facilities Grant, which I know was spoken about previously, and that supports people who are either owner-occupiers in privately rented or in housing association. But then the HRA supports those who are council tenants in making those properties adaptable for their needs. We do work closely with our housing colleagues, even before with Homes for Haringey, in regards to identifying if it's feasible to adapt that property or if it's best that that person may be rehoused into more suitable accommodation. So that consideration is also given. But obviously where people need those adaptations to keep them independent and living safely at home, we'll undertake those in adults. We are starting to work closer with our housing colleagues around keeping a register of those properties. So what if properties that we may adapt in adults, making sure that our housing colleagues know that for if they do come up for retenancy or reletting, that that's picked up and then allocated to suitable, you know, people who may already be identified as needing an adapted property.
So within the housing service, we tend to do the works at point of major investment. So as Councillor Carlin mentioned about the Noel Park pods, when we are doing major investment in people's properties, normally around kitchens and bathrooms, but also some will be around things like electrics, access, that's when we'll do our investment. It works actually really well in our team generally in terms of we identify it quite early. We work with the residents. We've got an in-house team of OTs who work alongside them. And actually, I think it is one of the areas that works really well in terms of enable people to maintain their tenancies. And obviously, we do some repairs to existing adaptations within properties. Generally works okay, I would say, but some of the more specialist equipment, there are some challenges, but we do actually have one of our operatives is properly trained to work on certain types of adaptations, and we're looking to sort of extend that. And the other thing, which is a new initiative we're working on at the moment, is looking at adapting some of our void properties for adaptations. So we're looking at some particularly high need residents we tend to spend a lot of money without borough accommodation, particularly with children. So we've been looking at some of our voids as to whether they're suitable for adaptation and extension, particularly around sort of where you've got really, really high needs and need things like through-floor lifts and things like that, much easier to do at void stage rather than when with the residents in situ. So we're looking at a whole kind of plethora of how we can kind of improve the offer to our disabled residents. And even though it wasn't mentioned, HCBS are doing their pilot on their first one as well for an adapted ground floor property as part of the HCBS offer.
Great, thanks for that. I suppose, so this item's coming here after, it's something that came out of the Scrutiny Cafe, I think, where we had people who were there were quite dissatisfied, let's say, with what they've been seeing from the council. So in terms of being provided with either being provided with accommodation that's suitable in the first place, or if adaptations are necessary, actually getting adaptations in any kind of reasonable timescale, or getting the right adaptations. So I suppose what we'd be looking for is a real kind of honest assessment of what the problems are, and an acceptance that there are problems if there are, and an honest assessment of what they are, and what's being done to resolve them, I suppose. So that's where the starting point for this came from.
If I can come in, look, historically, to be frank, there has been a backlog. And as I said, initially, Homes for Haringey set up a service because there was a backlog within adults. So I want to make sure that our council tenants were living in adapted properties. And there has been a backlog, but I think that the policy of we're also our house building program is also building bespoke properties for families or for people who need adaptations on a number of our new build properties. So I think by doing, as Judith said, voids, CBS, etc. So instead of just doing actual adaptations when people are in the home, if we started, we're tackling it from two sides. But there are delays, and we see it in casework. There are delays. There definitely are still delays. It's difficult. We need some more work streams going forward, but I acknowledge the delays.
There is a significant improvement plan within adults on major adaptations. It does accompany more widely across all the tenures, so not just in council properties. But there is a significant improvement plan that we can probably share with this group as well. As Councillor Dana said, there is we had to stop when we all went into lockdown in 2020. That was one of the things that was paused for about 6 months. So catching up from that, obviously there was also, rightly so, some, reluctance from residents to have people and builders in their homes after we came out of lockdown in the first wave. So we are catching up from that, but we have seen significant improvements in completions of that, particularly over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. So it is moving in the right direction, but we can certainly share the service improvement plan that we have in this area.
I think I was just going to come in and say it is a really challenging area, and I think one of the issues around adaptations, particularly where people have deteriorating conditions, is sometimes you can't necessarily track the adaptations. Again, you can't change the property as quickly as the conditions are there. I also, it's going to sound like a slightly strange thing to say, it's a bit of an opportunity, I think, when we look at the lettings policy to see if we can really look at getting some good quality adapted properties for elderly people who may be under occupying large family homes. That I think if we can get some accommodation, that we start working on what we look at some of our, I've been talking about possibly looking at our ground floor voids to see if we can kind of identify ones that you just go, well, actually we should prioritise these for adapted properties. And then actually at the right point, we can have the right conversation with residents. So actually when the first conversation about I need some adaptations comes in, we can actually talk about moving them into good quality adapted properties rather than them quite often being in fuel poverty and under occupying, because you will see with elderly people, you put a stair lift in, then you put a wet room in, and then within 3 or 4 years, actually what they're doing is living downstairs. So I think we need to be quite proactive about encouraging residents into the right kind of accommodation as well. It is very difficult though, in adaptations, because it's normally about deteriorating health conditions.
Thank you. Dawn, you had a question.
Was more of a suggestion. It sounds like there's quite a lot going on as a result of the Scrutiny Cafe, and there could obviously be more. But I know residents are often disappointed with the council, doesn't think it's doing anything. And so those perhaps that raised it at the Scrutiny Cafe directly, it might be worth going back to them with an outline side of A4, what's going on to show that their concerns are being listened to, and maybe ask them for further suggestions, because the people living with these various disabilities are going to know a lot more about it than we possibly could. As far as I can see in this room, of course, that's making assumptions.
That's a really good point, and that's something that we have undertaken in the service improvement plan with across all 10 years, but we have met with a couple of residents who have experienced difficulties or delays, and it's been really a valuable experience. And within the occupational therapy adult social care world, we also we do have a major adaptations panel, and we're inviting people in to so that they can give their perspective, point of view, any sort of challenges to the officers as well. So that's been a really useful learning curve for us over the last 6 months.
Thank you. Mark, you had a question.
Yeah, just a quick point. I think I was on Adult Scrutiny. We had a presentation about the improvement plan, so it's great what you suggested in terms of feeding back how that's going. I think I remember from some of those discussions, there was quite a bit of discussion about money and funding, and obviously a lot of the benefits from this, well, obviously we want the best benefits to go to the residents, but it does actually benefit the health service quite substantially. And I think there was some sort of discussions around if we can get contributions from the NHS. Is there any sort of progress on that?
So the disabled facility grants comes through the Better Care Fund fully, so that's fully funded through them. We haven't had any discussions around the HRA and how that might, we get a contribution from them on that. So that's, I can certainly investigate that and take that forward, but we do get a contribution from the Better Care, but it's fully funded by the Better Care Fund.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much for that report, and thank you, Judith, Dana, David, and it's Anita, isn't it? Yes. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. And we've just got a few kind of a few little bits and pieces to finish the meeting off. So it's just the work programme left, isn't it? Yeah. Anything particular we need to raise under the work programme, Philip?
Not a lot. I don't have an enormous amount to say, but you will find in your pack at page 105 is the current draft work plan. So for the next meeting, it's budget scrutiny. So we'll be going through the MTFS as reported to Cabinet in December, and within that there will also be the savings relevant to this panel that will be pulled out, and you'll be asked to make recommendations on those. So in addition to that report, the Chair's asked for an update on repairs and sort of the improvement plan that's in place on repairs, with the caveat and understanding that obviously Homes for Haringey has only been insourced a couple of months, and this is sort of the council is at the start of this journey. So I guess the other thing to say is that obviously for February, our final meeting of the year, we are open to suggestions. If there is anything you would like on the agenda, you can email myself or the Chair. And also just point out, as well as the work plan, you will have the feedback from the Scrutiny Cafe, so you can see the different topics and the discussion points that have come up. And I've tried, where possible, to sort of respond how those will be responded to, whether that's, reports to future meetings, questions to the Cabinet member. So I guess you should be able to really feed through what came up in the Scrutiny Cafe into some of the stuff in the work plan. So both of those are really just for you to note, and that's it.
Thank you very much for that, Philip. So does anyone have anything to raise under this item? As Philip said, any suggestions for items for our February meeting can be emailed through, or you can just text me or speak to me in person, anything like that. Okay, fantastic. Right, Daz, there are no new items of urgent business. We just need to note that, as Philip just mentioned, we've got 2 more meetings left in this municipal year, 12th of December and 27th of February. And unless anyone's got anything urgent to raise, we can close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.